Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Dieci racconti di solidarietà e aiuto concreto. Storie ricche d'amore, riscatto, coraggio e cura. Storie di persone che donano e che ispirano a costruire una società inclusiva. Una mano a chi sostiene. Storie.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Dieci racconti di solidarietà e aiuto concreto. Storie ricche d'amore, riscatto, coraggio e cura. Storie di persone che donano e che ispirano a costruire una società inclusiva. Una mano a chi sostiene. Storie.
Fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Io vorrei dire che
I would like to say that here at the Rimini meeting, actually it is so big. It's become much bigger, and it's big. It's great because of a need. I mean, I hope nobody gets offended of those who are really big. I mean, I felt a feeling of sweetness, of tenderness, and I wondered why. In seeing that there are so many young people who work here. There are lots of people, starting from those who built the meeting, up to those who help in the various stands, of those who accompany and drive you around of the car. All these young people who do all of this for free. As Franco Branciali said, actually, they do everything for free. This is an offer of the self. And furthermore, I'm really very, very happy. I'm not here to judge anyone. When I go around and I see that there are so many people as if they were, and actually they're here, they're working. They do this because they want to leave witness. And how can one talk about communion and liberation and the Rimini meeting if you do not witness these things, if you do not touch them with your hands? And I think that this can also apply to everything. And then, this is how it is. This is how it should be. Actually, this doesn't mean a lot. Actually, this is what it should be, this testimony, the Christian testimony. We as Christians, why are we incapable to be presences who, simply for the fact that they live like that, they are capable of embracing and including and integrating others. I mean, actually, I was not caught by communion and liberation because of whatever theory. I was caught by them when they visited me. I got a visit by 3 or 4 people because of their friendship, because of their tenderness. They were capable of giving me something more, which is human. And this is something that today society, even a vast majority of the Christian society, has abandoned. To follow the myth of progressism, which is something different than progress. Real progress actually knows that it has a task to do, like theater. It is exactly what theater should do every day. I'm nearly finished. I've tried to, in a way, go over my emotions, and please bear with me if I've spoken for too long. I would now to remind you, actually, after the first 10 years of the Rimini meeting, I would like to remember to spend a nice word for all of you. I would like to call you by your name, each and any one of you. Actually, would, if I did so, we would be here up to for many days. So I would like just to mention 2 people who are emblematic, and they are Elena and Antonio Smurro. I would like to thank them all. Emilia and Antonio Smurro for the Rimini meeting, because they represent you all. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, everybody. My name is Davide Dall'Ombra. I am the director of Casa Testori. We wanted to start with this video of a contribution by Giovanni Testori at the Rimini meeting in 1989. We started from this video because bringing the living testimony of Giovanni Testori to the Rimini meeting means bringing him back home and telling us something more of his history as well as of the history of the Rimini meeting. Together with us this evening, we have three very important guests. They're here to talk about Giovanni Testori as well as about something very important for the culture of this century. And we have Angela Demattè. She is an actress and playwright, and Riccardo Bonacina, as well as Emilia Guarnieri. Riccardo Bonacina is a founder of Vita, and he's a long-lasting experience in the world of theater that has brought him very close to Giovanni Testori. Very briefly, I would like to spend a couple of words to tell you how we decided to go back to 1989. I think it is particularly important to focus on this year. This year, we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of Giovanni Testori's birth. This extraordinary encounter between Testori and the Rimini meeting, Communion and Liberation, actually happened at a very precise moment in the life of Giovanni Testori, and this encounter has to be contextualized in a specific moment in which the relationship between Testori and faith would then mark the whole of his life. So I think it's important, first of all, to be clear about the faith of Testori. Many people have talked about the faith of Giovanni Testori since the 1970s, but in fact, he was born as a Catholic, and he's always had this kind of exchange of views in his contemporary society as a Catholic. And this is particularly important because the encounter he had with the Rimini meeting and Communion and Liberation is even more important precisely because of this, because he recognized the humanity of Communion and Liberation as his own, as a kind of humanity, as a kind of mankind that is linked to reality, to a real Jesus Christ, and not an abstract one. And therefore, this makes the extraordinary encounter between him and Communion and Liberation even more extraordinary. I think that the contributors we have here today will give us the chance to understand the depth of the stories as an artist, as well as in Communion and Liberation, because Testori brought with himself a set of knowledge of the culture of the last century that then provided a basis for an exchange of views with the Communion and Liberation movement. I would now like to leave the floor to Riccardo Bonacina. You've probably also heard from Testori's contribution that he made reference to the first young people who met him after an article, and this is something that Riccardo Bonacina will talk about. there was an article that was published in Corriere della Sera, in the Corriere della Sera newspaper. In the 1970s, he started publishing a number of articles as a art historian in Corriere della Sera. And since the 1970s, he started publishing some comments, so some editorials commenting news reports of those years. And he also made a number of contributions in which he provided his view. And this view was very peculiar. It was sometimes going against the flow. And this kind of emerged from his view, his gaze on reality. In this context, we had this meeting with Riccardo Bonacina. And once again, I would like to thank Riccardo Bonacina for being with us this evening. Thank you very much. Thanks to you all. I'm going to read this way. I'm not going to make any mistakes. So if whenever I'm asked to talk about that encounter, that meeting, and therefore forces me to go back to so many years ago, I am always surprised by the exaggeration of what happened after a very humble encounter between 3 university students and Giovanni Testori. So Don Giussani, Father Giussani used to invite us to say our prayers and to read then the papers, the newspapers. I also worked as a journalist, so he would always invite us to read the newspapers so that we could be able to judge reality. So prayers and reading the papers in the morning. This is maybe something that I would like to suggest that you do as well. I don't know if you read the news from the newspapers or your smartphones, but anyway, this is a good piece of advice because you can then realize what happens in the world. Some of us would then do the press review. A group of us did the press review every morning to follow up that indication. And the articles by Giovanni Testori, who followed Pasolini as a columnist at the Corriere della Sera, were really striking because actually they were breathing life. And then on the morning of the 20th of March 1978, 3 days after Moro's kidnapping and the murder of the man in his escort, and when we read his article entitled "Reality Without God," we were breathless because that article expressed what we were confusedly feeling. And I would like to read you some initial passages of that article. So the beginning of that article read as follows: "When, throughout the day on Thursday, caught in the harsh shadows of an emotion under which we did not want our responsibilities to yield in the slightest." So when we read the newspapers and followed TV news, and when the next day we opened the pages of the newspapers, the thing that distressed us most was that in the analysis of what had happened and in the sea of rhetorical smuggling that accompanied those analyses, we were not allowed to come across a single question that bore within itself the desperate need for a possible, total, and therefore religious explanation of the point at which life had arrived. You can easily understand that the article was really extraordinary compared to the editorials written back then. On the evening of that same day, there were 2 students, Antonio Simone and Antonio Tilette, and they were off-site university students, and they were living in an apartment near San Siro. We happened to dine together, and we came up with the idea of visiting Testori. I remember telling them, actually, when we read Giacomo Leopardi, sometimes we think it would be nice to share with him our experiences. And Giovanni Testori is alive, so why don't we go and visit him this was our starting point. Why don't we go and visit him? Let's go meet him. Actually, we knew that he had his office in Via Brera number 8 in Milan, and so we paid visit to him. Probably that was also the very first time for us to go to Via Brera, because we were all off-site university students. So we went to Via Brera. He opened the door, and we entered this office full of wonderful books and pictures, and we started talking to him. This was the very simple thought that moved us. I mean, visiting a columnist of Corriere della Sera who amazed us with his comments on the front page, whose words, unlike all the others, had to do with life. Also with our life as 22 or 23-year-old university students. So if the piece of advice is that go and meet what interests you. Don't be afraid of actually meeting people who appear to be interesting for you. So that was the first move, and then we had this meeting. And in short, we had a whole series of meetings and surprises. So we basically set up a real friendship between a group of university students and a so-called isolated intellectual, isolated in the meaning that he was isolated from all covens of power, and that was a friendship that lasted and still lasts. Also thanks to Davide's work and the work of Giuseppe Frangi and all the friends who work at Casa Testori. This friendship started because of a surprise. I mean, also Giovanni Testori was surprised by the fact that there was a group of young students asking to visit him to talk about an article. I thought I was running short of time. So we were all surprised. Actually, we would call him the master, because, in fact, for us, I mean, he served as a master. It often happened for us to go and visit him and actually listening to him while he was explaining certain works of art. So, and we soon understood that the kind of friendship that we established was an operational, so to say, friendship. A real friendship is always operational. So that kind of meeting immediately led us, for example, doing very, very interesting in the work of art for the setting up of exhibitions, for example, at San Carlo Church. Books were written afterwards, Nel Niente, or the book by Luca, that Lettera a Santa Caterina. So very young writers whom Giovanni Testori encouraged to write. Then we had the circuit of cultural centers was set up thanks to him. He suggested that we networked these cultural centers. Then there was a theater company, Gli Incamminati. The name was given by Testori. He made reference to a group in Bologna, and Incamminati means people who are always on the move, who are always walking, because he was making reference to this group in Bologna who was always walking. So the home of Testori was a real place of encounter. Listening to him meant actually living, and he would teach us, he encouraged us to learn more. So we soon learned to understand pictures. Testori encouraged us to dare to navigate the open sea in a personal way, proposing a challenge for each of us, accompanying us all the way out of our quiet harbors of our securities and protections, inviting us never to be afraid. He would always tell us, "What are you afraid of?" He said, "Everything around here is some kind of a soup." He used the word soup. So everything around us is a web of petty interests and exchanges of prebends. And he would then give examples of these things that he was saying. You are so full of life, and then the gift you have received is not yours. And so what are you afraid of? So the idea is that you have to write, you have to write magazines. For example, I founded the magazine Life, Vita, that was set up the year after he died. Actually, the title I gave was Vita, Life, with no articles and no adjectives. And actually, he encouraged me a lot. It's really impossible to recount everything that ensued, not least because the adventure is not yet over. But perhaps it's possible to point out what of the story in this friendship most marked everything that followed. I would like to say two thanks among the infinite number of thanks that I should say. The first is for our teaching. It's forbidden. The word is forbidden that has nothing to do with man's life. This was one of the most important things that I learned from Giovanni Testori. He said that only in reality, can the creaturely sign be found. And that's the sense of our being alive, being in the world. Testori's story throughout the 15 years that I've been with him has always seemed to me to lie between one of the first episodes that I heard him recount and a sentence that I happened to pick up from the little room of the San Raffaele Hospital for an interview for Rai 2 in 1993 before his death. Testori wanted to explain where he got his passion for words, a word that was so imbued with life, and he always recounted an episode that happened to him as a child. So he once said that one evening, maybe Giuseppe, was that really an evening or an afternoon, Giuseppe? I don't remember. Anyway, one evening, going with his mother to do shopping, the young Testori came across a man tied with a chain between two carabinieri. And meeting his gaze, the young Testori, saw that the man said something. And then he said, well, he concluded, I remember that mouth of his every day and think, what did he say to me? What can I do so that this mouth that opened on the face of a man who was being taken away to a prison would not die? Would it not be diminished? What was that word? And what could I make him say? So he would recall this episode to stress the fact that words always have to deal with life. Something similar was said to me during an interview taken during his illness at the San Raffaele Hospital. He commented on the images of malnourished and dying children that newspapers and television used to recount the terrible famine of the Horn of Africa, which had spread in that area and was in the papers on those days. And he would say, and I quote, those terrible images of children judge us. I imagine myself meeting those hollowed out faces again in heaven, and they will ask us the reason for our carelessness, for the lie of our words in our lives. Those children only seemingly do not speak. Their words we will hear all on the day of judgment. So these two episodes, the episode that I heard many, many years ago and the one that I heard at the end of his life. So I often wonder what Testori would say, commenting on the deported Ukrainian children, of these children growing up in refugee camps. What would the people dying off the shores of Cutro or in the Mediterranean? These are the questions that Testori wanted to investigate. He was looking for an answer to these questions. He always used to say, let reality, life speak. So he was a great combatant. He taught us to quit abstractions. Reality, life has to speak. Let reality, life speak. Look for the word there. Let it spring from there. So the first thank you has to be said to him, because that's basically the first starting point for everything I did in my life afterwards. And the second is freedom. With him, we learned that freedom comes from the greater and humbler yes to the one and only necessary dependence. He would always quote Alfieri, who said, "Free always is not the thought freely expressed." It is a wonderful sentence. Free always is not the thought freely expressed. This is a really true sentence. Testori was a true independent, a rebel, a protester of every coven. Sometimes he was disdainful of any assignment. I mean, he would boast the fact that he did not get any jobs. He was some kind of an illegal worker, and he loved to quote this verse by Alfieri to specify what freedom was and where freedom came from in work or in life. He would say, do not sell out. Don't sell out your life or the life of the people you meet. Do not sell out your thoughts or your words. Take all the freedoms that only the yes to the one great mystery allows you to take. Shall I read it again? Because this is a very strong sentence. He used to say, and I quote, do not sell out your life or the life of those that you meet. Do not sell out your thoughts or the words. Take all the freedoms that only the yes to the one great mystery allows you to take. End of quote. And then to end with, I would like to quote Maurice Blanchot, a French writer of the first half of the 20th century, and he used to say, and I quote, friendship is this relationship without dependence in which the whole of life enters. End of quote. So the relationship with Testori was precisely this, friendship without dependence in which the whole of life was able to enter. Our life and the life of Testori. He was a father of many of us, and he was also capable of becoming the son of his own beginning.
Grazie Riccardo Bonacina.
Thank you, Riccardo. And now we move towards another important meeting, another important event among the numerous initiatives that were the center of attention of many young people that met Testori. In 1979, there was a very important show, Interrogatorio Maria, that involved so many young people, especially in the city of Forlì, but was then performed in many churches in Italy, and it was performed in front of John Paul II in 1980. And this is marks the beginning of the meeting of Rimini. Testori was present at the first edition, talking about an important character called Ambleto, and a character, the figure of the father. And this was the beginning of a relationship that will be the subject of Emilia Guarnieri's intervention. So this is a friendship that was carried on over the years between Testori and the meeting of Rimini. He always gave room to the meeting on the newspaper Corriere della Sera, defending its nature, saying that the meeting of Rimini is more than politics. And he also organized two important exhibitions for the meeting of Rimini, one with the works of Graham Sutherland, an English painter that had become a Catholic, and this shows us how Testori was working in so many different directions. And Testori was thinking about this exhibition of paintings depicting the crucifixion of Jesus, and in doing so, he starts himself to paint 20 extraordinary works, which are now part of the Testori Association heritage. And he also started to work at Ossa Mea, which is a collection devoted to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. So there is this cultural activity as a painter, as a poet, as a writer. So that's what he was. That soul, that work that he did was really a 360 degrees work. And then there was another exhibition that on Francis Bacon. It's, well, a painter who at the time in 1983 was already a very important painter. And so this exhibition included a series of paintings that belonged to Brera at the time, but then unfortunately they went back to their legitimate owners. Anyway, during that period of time, he managed to create this exhibition in Rimini Church, in one of the external exhibitions that are organized during the meeting in Rimini. So that had created kind of a fight on the Corriere della Sera, because people said that it was not worthy to move all these paintings for just 1 week, which was the duration of the exhibition. And Testori wrote an article in response by saying, Catholic people cannot look at the works of Bacon. So the works of a painter who was really going against the regular trends of arts. So we now are at that very important year, 1989, when Testori was present for the whole edition of the meeting. And I now leave the word to Emilia Guarnieri, co-founder of the meeting, and she will tell us about what happened in 1989.
Scusa, io amo dire che il mio incontro con Testori.
My meeting with Testori in 1980, when he first took part in the Rimini meeting, but actually I had already met him in 1978 when he wrote those articles. I still remember where I was that morning, that title, La Maestà della Vita. We would not have expected something like that on the Corriere della Sera at the time. Nor would we have expected realtà senza Dio, reality without God, that was quoted by Riccardo. So I was really impressed, together with all my friends that were working with me at the time, because that was a time when an ideologized culture couldn't even imagine the fact that Christianity could be a factor in life, a spiritual factor, a factor in the church, a personal, individual factor, so that it could become really a factor in the life of man was not imaginable. So in a very explicit way, it was said that this had something to do with the religious dimension. So in March 1978, 2 years before the first edition of the Rimini meeting, there was already a link with that astonishment, with that work. There are so many other friends here that remember how we looked at that work, at that article. We really wanted a presence. They were, well, it was a time with of popular affairs. We had an education through the friendship with Father Giussani, had something to do with life in a very concrete way. Faith that was embedded into life, in our lives, and in the lives of other people. So something material, something concrete. So we were thinking about saying something about the Christian faith, but not in an ideological way, more like an experience. Some among us had this wish to do something significant in our reality, and they had shared this with friends who were not believers, something that had a real significant cultural dimension. So, in the middle of all this, in summer 1979, the idea of the Rimini meeting was born as a place where people could actually meet. We wanted meeting between people and experiences rather than ideas. So we started to look for people, experiences. So we started to work with the weekly Il Sabato. Testori had started already working with this weekly. And in 1980, there was the first edition of the Rimini meeting where Testori was invited, and he spoke about the subject, Truth, the Strength of Peace, a title that was particularly suitable for Testori, and it was actually the same title that the Pope had given to the Day of Peace that year. So I didn't find the text itself, which wasn't published by Testori, but he wrote about that on the Corriere della Sera, and I remember how he talked about Hamlet, because it took from the Hamlet, there is something rotten in Denmark. So it was a sort of judgment on the kind of reality we were living in. So the problem was to unveil the lies and find the truth. But it was very direct in saying what the truth was. The truth that makes man a man, and his being is the child of the Father, and thus the brother of any other man. So from that moment on, we were actually together in a way. That was the beginning of our friendship, our syntony on the meaning of things. And then we had the post-Hamlet phase, and we had the work at the Teatro Tenda, which meant a lot for us, because it was something extremely important for those who loved the theater. So that night we managed to perform this work at the Teatro Tenda. In 1983 there was the exhibition we talked about before, the exhibition by Francis Bacon. Anyway, nothing was taken for granted with Giovanni, that's for sure. And then there was a moment of misunderstanding. And, not many of us remember this. And I'm going to explain why. Testori had not come to the Rimini meeting for a few years. And if you live the meeting in Rimini, only by reading about it on the newspapers, you have a very distorted perception of what the meeting is. So apparently Testori read the newspapers in those years, and I always think that if something is criticized, there must be a reason for it. So probably there was something that he didn't like, something that he found maybe condescending towards the culture of the world. So I was told that there was something he didn't like about the meeting, and so when he was in Rimini during the winter, I went and visited him in his hotel, and there were other events similar in the past. So other people, other guests of the meeting or friends of the meeting who then decided that there was something wrong with the meeting itself. And so I went there. It was really, really beautiful. It was a theatrical moment in itself. I arrived in that meeting room in the hotel where he was accommodated, and he wasn't there. I didn't know where he was. And he came out of a curtain. And that had a meaning, too. It was as if he were saying, I'm here, but you cannot catch me. I'm here, but not in the same way that you might have thought. We couldn't actually explain anything. We just tried to find a kind of a meeting point, which we managed to do, and we were still focusing our work and our efforts on the truth. And that's where we started working together again. And this is another aspect that makes us very grateful. With this friendship, then we had the friendship with Banterle, Branciaroli, the Incamminati, Riccardo. So a whole story that was very important for the meeting. In 1989, there were the meetings with Giovanni, but before the great meeting, the great encounter, there was the performance of Miguel Magnara, where Testori, sorry. So this is a mistake that does have a meaning anyway. Was not directly involved, but Branciaroli was involved, and Emanuele Banter was involved, because these are things that need to be said, even if it is always written, directed by Franco Branciaroli. But the real guardian of all of this was Emanuele, who really worked to keep alive all of this.
Emanuele
really managed to preserve everything that the Incamminati did. And I'm really grateful to him for this. So there was this Miguel Magnara with the 6 paintings from 9 o'clock until 3 a.m. in the whole city. Some kind of crazy thing we did. And Testori really was deeply involved in all this. He wrote about that. And then there was this event in 1979, the one you saw in the video at the beginning, and he quoted Mounier by saying, we need to suffer because the truth cannot be crystallized in a doctrine, but it has to be born by flesh. So there are 3 main keywords: truth, suffering, and flesh. So these are the 3 words that indicate his path that were very dear to him, because his path, his friendship with us, that part where he says that community liberation took me as a friend, seems to be based on a shared history, not because of some ideas. If someone would ask me, what were the ideas that you shared with the story, I wouldn't have been able to answer. There was a strong need to give a meaning to this experience of feeling lost.
Stampa della mattina, tra l'altro, lui aveva
In the press conference, he had expressed very clearly the consistency of this point. He said, my intervention this afternoon will stress once again the need for the Christian event that is at the center of the world becomes the center of the history of man. The Christian event needs to be welcomed as it is, an event made of flesh, because it is the embodiment. It's not something abstract, and it's not a symbol. So if we look at these words that Testori pronounced in 1989, and then we look at today's reality, they are probably more topical today than they were then. So that the embodiment becomes as an event of flesh and blood. Often, we needed to look at this as the way we interpret Christianity today. So this was probably one of the most astonishing aspects of his experience. That year in Milan, Testori said, talking to us, do not lose this humanity that is not scandalized by anything. Otherwise, we lose the meaning of the embodiment. So this is really a way to not to have a fear. Why? Because the mystery didn't fear what was human. The embodiment is the testimony that the mystery was also involved. And this made us vibrate. The meeting itself was something that, was exactly this. There is this taste for real life in the Rimini meeting. It was never explained with Christianity and life. We never did that at the Rimini meeting. We always had people here that tried to live their lives in all its aspects, looking at this fact that judges the world. So there's this real life, this experience, and someone who spoke with these words, well, obviously would really touch us. In 1989, he was a real protagonist in the Rimini meeting, the meeting in the Great Hall that we saw before, the presentation of with the note, the exhibition of on the Via Crucis by Bellini, and then the drama he wrote on a text by Father Giussani, and one of the most beautiful things, in Exitu, a test that Bracciaroli then performed on the stairs of the Central Railway Station in Milan, where a young man is overdosing in the toilet of the Central Station in Milan. This was performed in a jail, and well, that was not obvious in 1989. It wasn't obvious at all. This is an extreme test in Exitu, and his presence at the meeting went on with the exhibition of the Testori Association in 2003, the translation of the first letter to the Corinthians, and then in 1998 again. So, well, I'm talking about all this because I think it is important that we said so, because these were gifts that we were given. The meeting actually lives of these offers, of the beauty that is donated by many other people. So we really need, it's our duty to say these things, because we're grateful. In 1998, a book was published by Rondoni with the editorial article Maestà della Vita. 2013, another exhibition on the paintings on boxing matches. And, well, the presence of Testori was always here at the meeting. So I would really thank those who have organized this event tonight, because this is an opportunity for me to look back at the past 15 years of friendship. And I realized that in life that there is nothing that matters more than flesh of which we're made. So that was clear to him. There was some kind of a reference to the flesh in him, also in his voice, that was so deep. Everything was incredibly carnal. Everything was part of his experience, and I think that Testori was meeting Testori was knowing that there is nothing that matters more than experience, because you cannot cheat on experience, you cannot lie about experience. So we are really grateful to Giovanni Testori for this.
Ringrazio, tra l'altro vi consiglio di vedere.
Thank you very much. I'd kindly suggest that you see the whole of this video by Giovanni Testori when he participated in the edition of the meeting of 1989, because you can truly understand actually what his experience and thoughts were. He was very critical. He was very out straight, also in criticizing the people he was dealing with. And most importantly, there is a continuum between theater, faith, society. I mean, if you listen to the whole of his contribution to the meeting in 1989, you can really understand the essence of a man who is all round in his perception of all the aspects of life that he meets. So here you are, puppets with no shape or sense. The night has come down on Monza, on the cloister, on the church and on the garden of St. Paul. And the Ambro continues flowing. Martino de Leiva, master of Monza, servant of Filippo, and thief of the goods and the properties that were mine. Can you hear me? You who stepped upon any principle in favor of the strength of your king and your false religion. What is left of you, of your victories and your triumphs, of you who didn't have any hesitation to destroy my youth and my right to be free, and who closed me here among the closed walls of a convent? Tonight I'm coming back here and I'm shouting against you. You be damned any day in which you made me pregnant. The companions and the mother nun of those, or what will remain of my prison. Here you are with all the dead people of the convent, of the village. If our bodies are entitled to resurrection, what kind of resurrection can we have? So the Verb has been turned into flesh. And you know, so God of matter and blood, who are looking upon us in the nights of fears. And now it is the flesh that actually becomes Verb, that calls upon you, your very nature. So the flowers, my love, the flowers of our springs without peace, the petals in my mouth, No, it's still too early to speak like that. We need another kind of love, the love that is full of truth and swear words. Francesca Imberzaga, you were holding the keys of the convent and you were close and disclose the gates of hell. Where is your authority and your dominion now? When my father stipulated with your order, you were beautiful in the convent and you were the head nun of the convent. Why didn't you stand up in the name of holiness, shouting against the person, because the convent was the place of perfection? So I will call you one by one, but your ears are not going to listen any voice. And yet on the 25th of March 1889, you well heard the voices that would decide of me and my existence. Why did none of you had the strength of refusing this torture, this crime? Because it was my life that was at stake, the whole of my life. So can you hear me? You damned nuns. There is no spirit of obedience or religion that could be against the liberty of life.
È l'incipit della...
This is the beginning of the Nun of Monza, 1967. It is a piece that is extremely dear to Demattè. And now she will tell us what it means to meet Testori after Testori. And I think that it is clear for those who met him that the presence of Testori that is something that acts for the entirety of life. So this has emerged very clearly from the words of our guests. But the story for many of us was a meeting with his words, with his written works, and a meeting as astonishing. And it was right to have a testimony of what it meant to meet Testori along one's path within the world of theater with Angela Demattè. Thank you, Davide. And it's a great honor for me to take part in this meeting. And thanks to Giuseppe Frangi and the association, the Testori Association. I was looking for the beginning of the Monaca di Monza, which was the test that Lucilla Morlacchi, an actress from Testori, wrote another version of this Mariana De Leia, that of I Promessi Sposi alla Prova. In 2003, she staged this test. It is a test that is cut, but actually I couldn't find it anymore. So I took the published text and I actually remembered all the parts that were cut after 20 years or more. And what really hits me is that what we do in the beginning of our careers, how this stays with us during our the whole of our lives. So these young students who went quite bravely to meet Testori is something that also impressed me. And this also actually was an important element in my background. So I remembered the cuts, but also the interrelation by Lucilla. This is what masters do. They actually carve something into our lives. So this is the curiosity of these kids that allowed my curiosity to feel worthy of manifesting itself. And it has become the prime joy of my work. I started my work by interviewing people, looking for people who are in a way extravagant. But I would like to talk about Mariana De Leyva, the nun of Monza, who said You should have loved me as I am, Father. So someone who's looking for love, also in an illicit way, that feels the injustice of the feeling, and at the end it cries, come down, you too. And so this is something that comes out many times in the Arialda, in the Fabricone, in the Abboleto, and in the Erodias. And this continuous, incessant, imploring cry that I have always found true and poignant. And I think it has affected in some way my work as an author and as a teacher of authors, because that cry allowed and allows that most hidden and fundamental part of me and my students to emerge. That I can, this part is what I call shame. What is that you are ashamed of? My mother used to ask me. Well, this is a state of the soul that I cannot translate. Someone who lives in a language which is not appropriate, of someone who cannot really talk. But this is not really correct, because the shame I felt when I was a kid was something different. It was an obscure feeling and pure feeling. I would like to ask my mother, do you love me even with all my flaws? Do you think I'm worthy to be in the world? These ancient and small parties, I think that part that the story teaches us to make speak, transfiguring it in the characters he puts on stage. Our hidden shame, I often tell my students, is the part of us that reaches the audience. There we all recognize ourselves. There our text becomes universal. What do we look for in a teacher? We look for a mirror, for a father, for someone who allows us to exist. I think I found a lot in Giovanni Testori and in his students. I can write my own work. His generosity allows me and a great many authors older and younger than me to find our own word, our own personal language. In what does this Testorian generosity consist? I will say it perhaps too simply, in every way to put into play what he feels without any discount, risking many redundancy, repetitions, excesses, but he never comes down above or below what he feels. And if what he feels is full of contradictions, precisely because it is full of contradictions of the need of blasphemy, he puts it into play. And for that, it needs theater. It needs the embodied word that precisely because it is embodied is not forced to remain in the space of right and wrong, in the space of pure reason. The word that becomes flesh and can bear the contradiction of existence. The body fills with meaning and fills in what is not comprehensible, what can only remain enigma. The human being asks, how do I stay in the world with my contradictions? The playwright answers him saying, I don't know, but I can put them into play. This is a great teaching by Testori and Shakespeare and so many others. It is really something that reconnects us with the ancient function of theater, which is a mythical and sacred function, where the word sacred has all its mysterious sphere. I believe that this is what an artist should and can do. Help us see and thus endure and sometimes even enjoy the contradictions of our feeling and existence itself. Precisely because she has a space to play out the contradictions, a play where people come together, not to find the right words, but live in words. You can accept not to resolve, to live with the shame of having come into the world. I would like to conclude with a piece from Ableto, which is a text dating back to 1972 that comes before everything we talked about today. And this is a text that is written in the language invented by Testori. So the idea that you shouldn't be ashamed to find your own language because the word has to go back to being flesh.
Dato l'am e s'è dismentegato de giuntarci il bleto.
This is now a reading of a text by Testori in his own language.
Il braccio di qui sì, e il braccio della no, la gamba di sinistra sì, e quella di destra no. E in così la testa, in così i bigoli, in così il ventro, c'è in domani una roba che ho tutta intrega. Ma cosa servisce avercelo il cuore, avercelo tutto intrego, avercelo che se litega, se morde, se sangue ne marzisce? A cosa? Se il resto è in doma mezzo e per giunta sbagliato anche quello, ci si inrabisce, ci si incazza, ci si imbilisce, se suda, se perde sangue, se perde bava, ci si fa saltare in del via la crappa e inde poi, francese, se almeno resi qua a te a dirmi una delle tue poesie o a contarmi una delle tue storie, manca a te la vita te prende e te sei come il Battista. Hai scegliuto la vose che vosa in del deserto e in così parli domade amore. Ma che amore? E in dove si trova? In che anima? In che buso della terra e dell'universo? L'amore, mi dice la voce che vosa in del deserto, anche l'amore che si rivolta. Rispondimi da in dove sei, Santo Ioanne senza aureola, anche quello che si scadena contro il padre, contro la madre, contro la vita, sì. Hai dizzuto? Sì. Sei proprio te che mi ha risponduto? Sei proprio te o è stato invece un filo di paglia che sei piegato lì in la terra? Me disi de sì, un'altra volta, mi riempisci l'aria, il cortilo, le nigore, la crappa de sì, 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 sì. E allora va avanti, anche se la crappa avrà da spaccarsi in desù del tutto, anche se avrai da perdere per istrada l'am e essere più niento de niento, avanti senza più nessunissima fermata, avanti amore, anche se sei in solamente desperazione e voglia de morire, avanti, insino alla fine, exit ambleto.
E andiamo avanti.
So let's move on. Unfortunately, not with this encounter, not with this meeting, because unfortunately we're coming to an end, but we'll certainly have many other opportunities to continue this relationship with Giovanni Testori. There are 2 other sessions on Testori. Tomorrow we have this session on Testori, Gaber and Iannacci at 7 p.m. And then the day after tomorrow, Testori and Alviero Sciamman, Sofiantini, and Walter Malosti. And that will be on the 22nd of August at 5 p.m. Furthermore, I'd like to invite you, to suggest you that you go to Theater Galli. There will be a show, Maddalene, staging a very peculiar piece by Giovanni Testori, thanks to the direction and the interpretation of Walter Malosti. So that is something that shouldn't be missed, so that you can really listen from the words of Giovanni Testori that our dear guest has showed us. So thanks to all who participated, thanks to you all, and goodbye.
Civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Dieci racconti di solidarietà e aiuto concreto. Storie ricche d'amore, riscatto, coraggio e cura. Storie di persone che donano e che ispirano a costruire una società inclusiva. Una mano a chi sostiene. Storie.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Dieci racconti di solidarietà e aiuto concreto. Storie ricche d'amore, riscatto, coraggio e cura. Storie di persone che donano e che ispirano a costruire una società inclusiva. Una mano a chi sostiene. Storie.